Today's episode is about the biology is meeting the tech. Because we often say that the farming is too traditional and the farmers haven't changed their ways. There is a lot of buzz around antibiotics. There is a lot of like misconceptions out there. People are talking about all sorts of irrational things related to the farming. They think that still the farmers are probably living in the 18th century, but the reality is, of course, it's different, and especially in Scandinavia, where we can all learn from something, and that is that state is actually helping the companies in innovating the industry and aquaculture in general, and the whole food system is being heavily innovated with the help of the state. So, but Scandinavian example is a bit different. That luxury we have in Scandinavia that could not be copy pasted elsewhere too easily, but still there is a lot of learning what people can actually have from here. That how this cluster system works and how this uh, Norwegian system, or generally it's also in Denmark and Iceland and elsewhere. So how these systems work, how the innovation takes place, how the industry and the private players, they all get together and try to solve the problems without thinking about what's in it for me all the time, but actually thinking about the industry in the long term. So first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself, and then you can tell us about how this cluster thing works, please.
Sure, happy to. My name is Björgólfur Hávarðsson. I'm the innovation manager of the Seafood Innovation Cluster in Norway. Our cluster is part of the Norwegian Centers of Excellence, and that means we have a certain position within both the governmental funding system as well as the industry participation. There are several, actually numerous clusters all over Norway, different stages. There are 3 stages. And we have one sister cluster in Trondheim who are more focused on the tech side and the engineering side, while we are more in the biological direction. So our cluster is more in the biology, the seafood aspect, fish health, fish welfare, while they are engineering heavy and thus placed in Trondheim. We are I mean, the premise for creating a cluster is a number of companies see the interest and the need to cooperate. And you can only apply for this cluster status if you actually can demonstrate that you have been working together for a while, that you have established some sort of interest or tradition of cooperating, and then you have obvious industry-wide goals. This is not to be a system where you make one company better on to the cost of others. So this is always to look at the bigger picture. What can we do together to solve our immediate and future issues, and maybe preempt some of them? So today, I mean, we are a fairly young cluster. We are only about, say, 4.5, almost 5 years old. We are 8 employees, and we have divided ourselves. We work in 3 different departments, if you like. I don't like departments because that means that we work separately, which we don't. We overlap a lot, but we focus on education and talent to get young people to realize how extremely exciting this industry is and open some doors for them to get interested in jobs as well. And we have programs like Seafood Next and Seafood Trainee to do that. We have my area, which is innovation. So I coordinate and cooperate a lot with universities and companies and R&Ds and startups. We have specific issues, we have specific interests, which we try to work with. My work is a lot within digitalization, fish health, fish welfare, and now our overall footprint, both carbon, plastics, nutritional and otherwise, and how to reduce that. And the last, and I say last because it's the most recent within the cluster, but in no means least, it is what we call simply entrepreneurship, where we support startups. So we gather them into the fold, literally, in all types of maturity, and help them to either to mature to attract funding or to understand the market if they're coming from abroad. So how do they find their feet in Norway? Where to start? Whom to talk to? So we actually today we have membership companies from Italy, from Australia, from India, um, from US, even though they have established Norwegian companies now, like Innova Sea and Aquabite, and we are absolutely open to that. That all the solutions won't be found in Norway; they will be found worldwide, and we work very hard to find those talents and those corporations. Like I said, I mean, it's the nature of a cluster to be open and to share. We also share with people who come to us, so that's it goes both ways, absolutely. It's a really interesting way to work.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So, what I have understood is that this is really like it's 360-degree kind of help for,
Yeah,
for everybody actually to get involved in seafood and aquaculture. And tell us about a little bit about this thing, that what are really the challenges of today's aquaculture? I suppose normally you guys sitting in Bergen, the west of Norway, probably deal mostly with salmon and trout farming. So what are really the challenges, the biological challenges, of course, other than the sea lice, which are coming in the way uh, for the expansions? As I understood, like we don't have any increase in the biomass in last 7-8 years. It's quite stagnant. And what are the challenges which are actually what are the biological challenges which are actually blocking or in the way of further expansion? So can you walk us a little bit in that
sure. I mean,
direction?
absolutely, and those are, I would say, three Ys. That's biology. Um, you mentioned sea lice, and sea lice is our biggest issue. It's either the treatments for sea lice that are limiting, or mean that we lose fish. So that means that in some cases they can be harmful for the fish, but we have to de-lice because there's also the wild stocks to think about. And I mean, there's nothing to hide there. If you read the report from the Veterinary Institute for last year, you see that in areas of Norway we lose way too much fish. So it's sort of an unhappy gathering of several issues. Temperature. It may be gill issues, which are frequent. It may be that the fish is weakened from other reasons, and that will all come together in increased mortality. And that is something we need to solve. But the sea lice and gill issues are at the root of that. So, sort of segueing into gill issues, they are multiple and complicated, and some of them are due to bacteria and viruses. Some may be due to micro organisms such as amoeba, and there's sort of a wild card here that we don't have any measurements on, and that is jellyfish or stingers from jellyfish. They may come from jellyfish breaking up in the net and sending the stingers through the net, which then are the fish breathes in, and it burns in the gills. And for a human, that would be something similar to get a very bad asthmatic reaction. You get this reaction in the gills with slime and inflammation. And this is something that we know is living both deep and shallow in the sea. So pumping water from deeper depths and closing the cages would not entirely solve that. And algae are obviously an issue. They would also be an issue in closed cages to some degree, probably less so. So that's the biology. Another way, another hindrance that we see is if we grow quickly, and I mean in Norway, Iceland, Scotland, Canada, Chile, Faroe Islands, doesn't matter where is the feed coming from? I mean, we have, in a certain way, either in actual capacity or in people's opinion, the consumer opinions, we have reached a certain roof in that. Soy is highly criticized. even if the soy is not taken from the Amazonas area, that still has sort of the stain of ruining the Amazonas. So that needs to be handled. So we are looking into macroalgae as a substrate for yeast production of proteins. Obviously, microalgae has been a tantalizing possibility for now almost 30 years, and it seems to be tantalizing still a little bit in the future. It's not coming online with that volume. Insect larvae, black shoulder fly typically, very interesting. I'm not sure about how big the production can be in Norway at all because we are a small country and our resources are spread all over. But there will be some, obviously, in our scale. But I think the big scale will come from abroad where you have bigger substrate for a larvae to eat from. And the third one is technology. We know that some of the equipment we use is really good and some of it can be improved. We saw it in Norway, if I'm being very sort of inward looking here. We got a new standard, say, 10 years ago. Don't arrest me on that actual date, but a number of years ago, we got a new standard that addresses the capabilities of nets, floating rings, and anchoring equipment, and how those join in what's called dynamic forces, how they act and react on each other. And we saw, and then within 2 years from that new standard coming online, you as a farmer had to be able to show what was called a site certificate, showing that all these important aspects fit together and didn't destroy each other, tear each other apart, and every other equipment you were using was supposed to fit into that picture. And we could see that the number of major escapees episodes went down amazingly quickly. So it shows what I guess I'm saying in a roundabout way. We have a lot of improvement to be done, but when we really apply ourselves to it through good standards and through good cooperation, we solve a lot. But I'm not saying that the equipment we have today is good enough because we see escapees and we see issues. And I think I'm a proponent of mixed technology, using open cages in parts of the farming, using closed sites on land or near shore in parts, and utilizing the best of all the technologies instead of tying us to a mast of one tech. Flexibility is good.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The flexibility is the key, and we shouldn't attach to one certain type of technology. We should be, as people say, technology agnostic, and we should be looking for solutions everywhere. And we will come back to that feed side, which is my favorite part later. But I would like to ask you about, like, normally, I was reading the PwC's barometer for seafood. And they discuss about also the offshore farming, and also like some report from DNVGL that they also discuss about the future of offshore farming. They don't really stick to only salmon and trout, but actually they look into further other species as well. We of course discuss about like the carbon footprint and sustainability. This part we will also come back, but one of the thing I'm wondering about, what is your understanding about offshore aquaculture? Because offshore aquaculture, if you really think about the theory, it really can solve everything and all the problems. But what are the challenges? What are the things which we don't hear? Is that like the fish can escape, or like the feed can go into the bottom and can disappear? What is the environmental challenges around offshore fish farming? Do you have any insights on that?
The insights are limited by the fact that we only have 2 farms who propose to go offshore, but they haven't yet. But I was a fisherman on an Icelandic offshore trawler for 4 years, so I have more than enough experience from what winter storms in the North Atlantic can produce in terms of power. So if we sum that into something very generalized and common sense, we are moving into a system that is it's beyond imagination, the power in the system. So I think if we are going to put fish out into these, and I'm obviously talking 5 to 7 years ahead, when we go into these deep oceanic areas or waters, we will have to contend with really high waves. We wouldn't. I mean, every winter you will see waves reaching over 10 meters. So just absorbing that energy in a structure is going to be a major engineering, and we do that with major oil tankers, but they are dynamic. They are not anchored to one spot. Another part is, and this is an open question. I'm not stating this as a fact, but in the, let's say, late 80s, we produced a lot of smolt for export to Norway and Iceland, and we saw actually that they got seasick in these deep ocean swells, because you wouldn't see breakers really often, but you will see really deep, heavy swells with long wavelength. So you would say you see maybe 60 or 100 meters between the wave tops, but really powerful waves, and that made this rotational energy. Wave is a rotational energy, and if fish find it uncomfortable, they just go dive, and they go down under that water. If you have cages that are only, and I say that with an Italian script here, that would be only 45, 50 meters, and waves with wavelength of 100 meters will go far deeper than that. So you would set that fish in rotary motion. Now, I don't know if they will get seasick, but we saw that with smolt, so that may be one issue. Another issue is obviously, and that's engineering, that's anchoring at 300 or 400 meters depth. The tether is going to be, if you have 1-point anchoring, like you have with a lot of oil loading buoys, that 1 point needs to be ridiculously strong. And a tether of 300 meters has its own dynamics and own strength. However, I think that can be overcome. I think most engineering issues are something we can overcome, and we see that in oil and shipping and gas lines and what's not. So, but I'm a little bit more concerned about the biology out there in terms of feed that will, and then obviously feces and urine that will escape from the cages. At 300, 400 meters depth, I don't think that's an issue.
Or would they be using a massive diaper?
Well, maybe. I see movement to that where people actually start thinking about what the salmon releases or the fish releases as a feces. It has become a resource. And the moment you turn that switch in your mind, solutions pop up. And we are actually looking into that in several projects in the cluster. How can we support that movement? Because we could have an own podcast about the future of phosphates in the world. Where is our agri going to get the phosphates in 30 to 60 years' time? That can be very interesting discussion.
Yeah, because that is a limited resource, and
Indeed.
Some people say that we will have in the future more conflicts even start to happen around it. So
you can have all the water in the world, but if you haven't got phosphates, you have no farming.
Yeah, so that is a big. So it is a limiting factor, and but one of the good thing is that we are actually running out of the arable land on the 30% surface we have. So that's where still I would say that the ocean, the food coming from the ocean actually do has its advantage in that way. And I think that more and more food has to come from the salty water, because humans cannot actually use that salty water, but the fish can. And if we find out the way how to do that, that could really maybe revolutionize our food system. And this mindless expansion we have on the agriculture can actually be turned, and we should be maybe putting more focus on the ocean systems and the food which can come from ocean. But of course, as you said, this is really, like, I would say, is still a new thing, because you have to depend a lot on the technology which is coming from the oil ridges, and you have to be very good at shipping to actually really harvest, go out in the deep and able to do that. And I don't think that everybody can afford it, given the circumstances of the economies all over the world. So it's a fancy thing. It has to be, of course, the food has to be that volume has to be there, and the cost has to be covered. So, but what I have noticed, the positive thing about these two projects you were discussing about, that the fish mortality has been only 4%. Overall, they state that it was 7% mortality by SALMAR, but actually it was 3% added up was because of some mechanical accident which happened because of the crash into the cage. But the 4% was a biological, like you can say, the mortality, and which is absolutely fantastic. If you really see that we have like 20% mortality sometimes in the farming, and if it can be reduced to that significant level, actually we are coming into a very good zone when it comes to the production. So yeah, so there are of course challenges everywhere. But what do you think about land-based fish farming bubble? I call it bubble sometimes. Sometimes I start to love it. Sometimes I start to call it bubble. It's really like zigzag, and many people are actually thinking all the time that where will the expansion come from? And I will try to coin you with some terminology or numbers, thinking about that we only have 3% fresh water available on land, and 2% of that fresh water is actually is you can actually use it, but 1% is in the form of your Icelandic glaciers or something. So why is, with this land-based fish farming movement, what is the interesting part is, of course, the food could be available locally to many people in their regions, and they have to don't rely on the transportation or the carbon emissions coming from the airplane uh, and the shipping. But how do you think around this thing that we already lack this freshwater resource, and then on the other hand we are seeing 80 projects popping out? So how do you have a rationale around it? I may be a bit biased, but do you have a rationale around it?
I'll just take your comment about bias first. I think it's okay to be biased if you are aware of it, and you actually add that into your formula. We are all human, and we have our ideas and biases. I've actually, and it's really interesting you say this about bubble, because I've been studying bubbles the last, let's say, 3 months, just to try to understand what's happening in the RAS. I'm not giving the bullet to RAS. You mustn't interpret me like that. But I think this rush, this absolute fascination of new technology reminds me of some bubbles that burst really with a high pop sound, reverberating globally. This is not going to reverb globally, but it's gonna burn somebody. I don't think we can avoid that. I think the move towards RAS, which is spawned in the success of salmon, to coin a phrase, it's impossible to grow in lucrative waters. I mean, Norway is not growing in the ocean. You're not getting any new licenses in Scotland or Ireland or Faroe Islands. Iceland is growing, but that's already purchased by Norwegian companies, so they have found a place there to grow. Canada is not growing, obviously; they are rather going the other way, and Chile has probably plateaued out due to biology, at least for the foreseeable time, both algae and other aspects. So I think people see this really lucrative industry. They see a market that seems to be gluttonous, literally, for salmon. And they say, if we want to play, we need to play somewhere where the license won't limit us. And actually, the Norwegian government has free licenses to produce salmon on land. And I think this combo with the wish of producing bigger smolts, reducing the exposure to risk. I mean, cage farming in ocean or any farming in the ocean is a risk business. We know that. There's no hiding that. And they are trying to move some of the risk into more controllable situations in the RAS facilities. But we are stumbling a lot. There are a lot of thresholds there. The salmon may do strange things, biology, and obviously my bias here is I'm a biologist, and I really think that people with spreadsheets are not calculating the biology of the fish into it. They look at the capabilities of the systems and how far they can push the fish, and the fish reacts by being sexually mature as a 1 kilo fish, or they don't smolt properly, or they react in some other way that's not. I mean, it's natural for them to react in that way, but for us, it's not commercially viable. And I think biology, biology is going to be the big hiccup here. And water chemistry.
They often say that biology eats technology for the breakfast.
But that's wrong. So simple. I mean, you can't technology. You can't come with technology that stops fish from being sexually mature after 12 months. You need to work with environmental cues, with light, temperature, salinities. You need to work with the genetics, and that is a huge proposition. You don't. I mean, we see how far we've come in genetics, in broodstock management, which has been a story of itself. But we are talking about years and years and years before we get those major shifts in biology in terms of that, in terms of breeding. Now, CRISPR might be a solution, but that's not viable today with the EU position on that. That's complete. That's probably another podcast as well. But I think biology is going to be.
Can you explain it a little bit, because you're talking about gene editing, probably, right?
Gene editing, yeah. It's not gene manipulation. This is where you open up the gene sequence literally like a bicycle chain, and you remove a link from another similar fish or for another salmon who has the beneficial trait that you want to spread into the population. It's not like taking a link from a truck or from a aeroplane or something. We are talking about moving genes between the same species in a efficient measure. So you're not manipulating anything. It's like breeding on steroids. It's breeding going really quickly. And that CRISPR method is really interesting, and people are talking about it in terms of sea lice systems, growth capability, feed capability, or feed conversion. So I think we need to have one eye on that technology anyway going into the future.
How do you think about the land-based fish farming combined with genetically modified way of doing it? I think Aqua Bounty is doing that, if I can name somebody commercially.
They are harvesting now.
Yeah, I think they just harvested.
Yeah. And I mean, I am a product of a European society with the European biases on that. So I'm very interested in CRISPR and this editing aspect, but the taking genes from different species or adding up so that you have 3 or 4 genes of the same site, I'm more skeptical about. And that fish would never be used in Norway, I think. Never is a really, really big word, but I don't think that would be accepted as a production animal in Norway.
Absolutely, not in the recent future. That's
no,
for sure.
No.
In the last part of today's discussion, I think we can discuss 2 questions. And number one is that we know that climate change is really going to make our oceans more acidic, and we are actually in a very it's one of the very critical area right now when it comes to the production, and maybe we have to adopt a different species actually to go away from the negativities of this temperature rise in the sea. Maybe we have to be also species agnostic and not just think about salmon and trout all the time, but maybe look into the shrimps, maybe look into the other species. And the other part I would like to discuss a little bit is that, of course, the feed side. This is like, we don't have much time for that today, but But the feed side is also very promising, especially after the Seaspiracy. I'm really happy as a feed expert that I suddenly became a very hot thing because of the Seaspiracy,
Yeah.
because now they are really asking the questions, and now the focus is on the feed. But of course, feed also relies a lot on the agriculture, and there is a huge there's a huge interlink, and it's a challenging thing to actually solve in the short term. But what are your thoughts around these two things I discussed?
I think ocean acidification or climate effect in its entirety is a threat that is beyond any one community or country to address. And the problem is that everybody will be hard hit, no matter how big or small your footprint is. So a lot of the responsibility is on the industrial world, and I don't think there's much discussion. The issue here is, okay, let's say that either the acidity or the temperature, and now I'm again looking at my shores, Norway, should we turn to other species? I think the right question is, where's the market for that switch? People are more conservative than the fish farmers. If the fish farmers see that they could make money from another species, say sea bream or sea bass in Norway, and then we're talking about extreme change. That means that Spain and Italy are now parts of Sahara climate system. May that never happen. That means that we are actually turning to wine production in Norway and fruit production because of the climate. Also with seafood, sea bream and sea bass or similar species, we have natural sea bass in Norway. So they thrive on the west coast and south coast of Norway. That means that we will have to switch to a new species where there may not be a market. People are conservative, and it will take a lot of hunger to switch to the different species. And when that happens, we may be in bigger problems than which species to harvest, because the weather systems may become really nasty in large parts of the industrial world. So that is a bleak future that I can't entirely foresee. But fish farming in Norway is based on the red species, which are really, really popular around the world and have become part of the sushi wave. I don't see. Just ask Turkish and Greek fish farmers or Spanish fish farmers how easy it is to get good prices. I mean, they are locked in a race to the bottom, competing downwards instead of developing the markets. Don't think we could compete with them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Especially as you mentioned, Turkish and Greece farmers. That's a really fair point. And actually, we shouldn't remember. We should also remember, of course, the love for the pink, which is inbuilt. And I was reading the other day the person actually who made this sushi market. Especially, he worked in Japan from Norwegian Seafood Council. So that person worked for 5 years or more actually to just convince the chefs to like it, and that really tells us the time it requires actually to change the mindset of the consumers, and of course that has to be also compensated, so one way or the other way. So well, that's very, very, I would say it's a catch-22. It's really
it is.
it's a difficult ask, but I really appreciate this discussion today, and I think that I like short discussions. Half an hour, 35 minutes is the best, because people get bored, and especially in the time of TikTok, as I said the other day, it's very difficult for people to actually. People try to judge the things based on the headlines and based on true sentence, and it is actually even true for the human capacity. Human is built for immediate dealing with the immediate threat, and our species is actually still the same as it was 100,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago. So we haven't really changed that much. We think we have changed, but we still actually act to the immediate threats which are there, and we don't think long term. That is our human speciality, and this is actually built in our biology, unfortunately. But we here try to still, for those humans actually who want to think a little bit more deeper, we actually try to still have something for them. So not for the, of course, the TikTok audience maybe, but I wish it will change. But this is really. But the purpose of this podcast has been actually to educate people and to highlight the good things. And it is and people can see that how transparent the fish farming industry is in journal. I mean, this is where it's not Volkswagen doing a fraud related to the emissions, that big scandal they got fined. It is totally different. Here things are really open. The farmers are actually collaborating with the regulators. Regulators are really tough, um, because they are really the tough bureaucracy you can actually ever imagine. And things are not that, if there were issues especially related to the food safety and other, like the antibiotic myth, for example. So if there were really the issues, we wouldn't have that social license to operate in the local community where you are operating. So it is really, people have to understand more deeply, and that's where we have this podcast, thinking about irrationality on the food plate, on your plate. Like there is all sorts of irrationality around it, and people have to think more deeply. And I also think that um, the immediate solutions, like I think it's okay to eat vegetables if you can cook by yourself, but it's not okay to just think that you will just watch Netflix for your food education by watching Seaspiracy or Plantspiracy, whatever it is. I made it up. The Plantspiracy is a friend. She made it up, but 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 whatever it is, like, you have to think more deeper, and it really demands the depth of thinking, because the food is actually have the power to make it or break our planet system as a whole, because this is one of the agriculture, aquaculture, the farming, this is one of the most profound tradition we have as a species. It dates back like 30,000 years ago. I'm actually looking into the evidence of farming. It has been 30,000 years. And at this point, they have found the evidence. This is really interesting, and we have to really kind of uh, we have to have this open debate and more transparency, like elsewhere in all food systems, and thinking about what is in it for us for the future, what is the right thing to do in the long run. And that's the whole point of thing. But thank you very much for actually coming here today and taking your time, and thank you very much for educating people and coming up with very interesting insights. And I really appreciate that, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny. Pleasure being here.